Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. Jennifer and I have been married for 10 years. A full decade of laughter, struggles, and dreams that we had once believed would last forever. But lately, something had changed. Something felt different. She was always somewhere else, mentally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically. It started subtly. A few weeks ago, she had begun talking about a new passion project, fundraising for the local community center. She had always been involved in charity work, but this time, her enthusiasm was different, almost urgent. She attended late-night meetings, weekend strategy sessions, and midweek donor events. While you're here, leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know. You're really diving into this, I said one night as she slipped on a fitted black dress, too elegant for a simple fundraiser. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's important, Mark. The center is struggling, and we need every dollar we can get. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But a seed of doubt had already planted itself in my mind. Then came the night our neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Oh, Jennifer's car looks so lovely at night," she had said with a warm chuckle. "I saw it parked outside Brandon Miller's building last Tuesday. Such a fancy neighborhood. Must be nice to know people in high places." Brandon Miller. He was an old friend. My friend. Until he wasn't. Brandon had always been charming, wealthy, and a little too eager to insert himself into our lives. He had never made a secret of his attraction to Jennifer, though he had always kept it just respectful enough to avoid outright confrontation. And now Jennifer's car had been spotted outside his condo. My mind raced. Could it be a coincidence? Maybe she was really attending some late-night charity event, and Brandon happened to live nearby. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. But I knew better. Jennifer and I had always been honest with each other. Or at least, that's what I had thought. But now, her words felt rehearsed, her gestures mechanical. That night, when she came home, I was waiting. She stepped inside, kicking off her heels with a sigh. "Long night," she murmured. We had to secure a last-minute donor. "Where was the fundraiser held?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She hesitated. The Hyatt downtown," she said smoothly. "We met in one of the conference rooms." Lies. I didn't flinch, didn't let her see my reaction. Instead, I leaned forward, pretending to be casually interested. "Funny," I said. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned seeing your car outside Brandon's place." For a split second, Jennifer's entire body tensed. She forced a laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, Mark, you know how people talk. I did drive past there, actually. I was picking up a donation from a friend who lives nearby." "Who?" Her lips parted, then closed again. "I don't think you know them," she finally said. I let the silence stretch between us, watching her closely. Her heartbeat was practically visible at the base of her throat. She was lying. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but I'd spent years observing people, reading between the lines. Jennifer had never been a good liar, until now. And that terrified me. Each time she returned home, she looked more exhausted, her makeup a little smudged, her smile just a little less convincing. Sometimes she would come back so late that I'd be drifting off to sleep, only to wake up when she crawled into bed beside me, her side of the mattress still cold. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. After all, she was doing good work, right? Fundraising events take time, especially when you're as involved as Jennifer was. But every night, as I watched her slip further away from me, the voice in my head grew louder. Then came that casual conversation with Mrs. Holloway, our nosy neighbor. "You know, I saw Jennifer's car parked outside Brandon Miller's condo the other night," Mrs. Holloway remarked, as if she were talking about the weather. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I had barely heard anything about Brandon Miller in years. He was a venture capitalist with deep pockets, an opportunist who was always in the right place at the right time. A few years ago, he had made a killing on some risky real estate deals, but I'd never trusted the man. He had a way of getting what he wanted, regardless of who got hurt along the way. Jennifer and Brandon had crossed paths before, at parties, fundraisers, charity galas, but there had never been anything more than a polite exchange between them. Or at least, that's what I had thought. Mrs. Holloway continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. It's a fancy building, of course. Brand new, sleek as can be. Must be nice to know people like him, right? She laughed, but I didn't join her. Yeah, must be, I muttered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I had to force myself to keep my face neutral. Mrs. Holloway had no idea what her passing comment had just done to me. Brandon Miller's condo. Jennifer's car. The pieces didn't add up. I had seen Jennifer's car parked in front of our house every night for weeks. But what about the night she'd been out late? That night, I didn't ask her about it. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more information, something concrete, before I let my suspicions take over. She was already good at lying, but I would need to see for myself. I spent the next few days trying to act normal. I worked, ate my meals, and pretended everything was fine. But every time Jennifer's phone buzzed, I couldn't stop myself from glancing over her shoulder. Every time she mentioned something about the fundraisers, I asked questions I didn't usually ask. I needed to know who she was spending her time with, where she was going, and, most importantly, why she had started acting differently. "Mark, are you okay? You've been distant," Jennifer said one evening, breaking the silence as we sat on the couch. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. But as I spoke, my eyes darted over her shoulder to her purse, where her phone was quietly vibrating. She looked at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You've been acting weird, like you don't trust me." "I don't trust you," I wanted to say. But instead, I nodded and let the moment pass. The following week, I took a different approach. One morning, I asked her if she could take a few hours off from her charity work to relax with me. "We haven't had a day off together in a while. Just us," I said, trying to keep the casual tone in my voice. Jennifer looked at me, her brow furrowed. "I'm kind of busy with the event planning, Mark. I can't just drop everything." I had expected her to decline, but the coldness of her reply stung more than I anticipated. It was as if she were a stranger, someone I didn't know. That evening, I called in a favor from a friend in the police department. He owed me a few, and I needed something simple, Jennifer's license plate number. I was just curious. It wasn't like I suspected anything. Well, not that much. But curiosity had a way of getting the best of me. The next day, I got the information I was looking for. Her car had indeed been near Brandon's condo on multiple occasions. What was I supposed to do with that? I didn't want to confront her with nothing but half-baked theories. I needed more. I had to see it for myself. And that's when I decided. I would follow her. The next time she left, I would trail her, see where she went and what she did. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I was desperate. Desperate for the truth. It wasn't about trusting her anymore. It wasn't even about our marriage at this point. It was about something deeper, something primal. I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut that told me something was terribly wrong. That night, Jennifer slipped on a black coat, one she usually wore for more formal events, and kissed me goodbye. "I'll be back late again." "Don't wait up," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I grabbed my keys and my jacket, my heart racing as I stepped outside. I couldn't let her know I was following her, so I waited a few minutes, my breath fogging in the cold night air. When I pulled out of our driveway, I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I was ready to find out. The drive felt like it took an eternity. I kept a safe distance as I watched Jennifer's car ahead of me, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wasn't sure where we were heading, but I knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to the community center, and I wasn't prepared for what I'd find when we reached our destination. Jennifer left at exactly 8 p.m., right on schedule. I gave her a 5-minute head start before slipping out the front door, keeping my movements deliberate. I wasn't interested in second-guessing anymore. I wanted the truth. No, I needed the truth. I took my truck instead of my sedan. A vehicle too familiar could be a problem. I kept my headlights off for the first stretch of the road, letting the soft glow of streetlights guide me until I was a safe distance behind her. She drove steadily, no signs of hesitation, no unnecessary turns. Straight through town, past the community center she was supposedly dedicated to saving. She didn't even glance in its direction. 15 minutes later, I saw it, the sleek glass-paneled condo building. Brandon Miller's place. Jennifer pulled into the underground parking garage, the security gate rolling down behind her. I kept going, driving past the building once, then doubling back to park a block away. From this angle, I had a clear view of the lobby through the large front windows. I waited. It didn't take long. A minute later, she stepped inside, shaking out her hair and slipping off her coat. She didn't text. She didn't call. She didn't hesitate. She walked toward the elevator. I sat in my truck, watching, absorbing every detail. There was nothing left to guess. But I wasn't leaving without confirmation. I stepped out, locking the door behind me without a sound. The parking garage was out, but the side entrance, past the manicured hedges, led to a private walkway. If I knew Brandon Miller, and I did, his place would be at the top. Penthouse level. Open concept, floor-to-ceiling windows. He had always liked showing off. A side alley ran behind the building, leading to the back courtyard. A good view, if you knew where to look. I found my spot near the rear gate, with a landscaping thinned just enough to see the upper floors. Brandon's unit was exactly where I expected, 4th level, facing the street. The curtains weren't fully drawn. A mistake. Jennifer stepped into view, setting her purse on the counter. She smoothed her dress, tilting her head in that way she always did when she was getting comfortable. Then Brandon. He walked up behind her, a glass of wine in one hand. She turned, smiling. He said something low, close. He slid the glass in her hand, fingers brushing. Then she laughed. And that was it. I didn't need to see more. I stepped back, my mind already assembling the next move. There wouldn't be any scene tonight. No confrontación. No outburst of rage. That wasn't my style. Jennifer thought she was in control. She thought she had time, that whatever she was doing here, she could manage it without consequence. That was her first mistake. I walked back to my truck, taking my time. There was no reason to rush, because when the moment came, she wouldn't see it coming. Jennifer came home at 2 a.m. She moved carefully, locking the door softly, slipping her heels off by the entrance like she was doing me a favor by not waking me. I kept my breathing steady, listening from the bedroom. She paused, probably checking if I was awake, then walked to the bathroom, her routine flawless. I didn't say a word. She climbed into bed minutes later, shifting slightly as if testing whether I'd turn toward her. I didn't. A moment of hesitation, then stillness. She was playing the long game, believing she had time to clean up whatever mess she was creating. By morning, I was already 2 steps ahead. The first thing I checked was the safe. I had never thought to double-check before, never had a reason to. But now, as I entered my home office and pulled open the cabinet, a few key items stood out as missing. Several financial statements, a copy of my business tax filings, one of my external drives, the one with encrypted documents. I closed the cabinet, rolling my jaw slightly as I turned toward my desk. The locked drawer where I kept printed copies of investment records was still intact, but a few folders had been shuffled. Jennifer wasn't reckless. She wouldn't have taken anything obvious, but she was sloppy in ways she didn't realize. I powered up my laptop, running through my business account. A few transactions caught my eye immediately, transfers I didn't recognize. Nothing massive. A few thousand here, 10,000 there. Just enough to slip under immediate suspicion, but not enough to avoid scrutiny if someone was actually looking. Jennifer had been testing the waters. A ping from my phone interrupted my thoughts. I glanced down. Incoming call. Charles Whitmore. I answered on the second ring. Mark, Charles said, his tone measured. I need to ask, have you authorized a series of transfers into a holding account under the name Garrison Company? I leaned back slightly, resting an elbow on the desk. No. Why? There was a pause. Because over the last 6 weeks, upwards of 200 grand has moved from your business account into that name. I ran a check. Garrison Company is a shell. No employees, no assets. It exists only to receive those deposits. Jennifer wasn't just cheating. She was stealing. I glanced at the empty space in the cabinet where my missing documents should have been. This wasn't impulsive. She had been planning it, moving slowly, shifting pieces into place before she made her final move. How long until someone else notices? I asked. Charles exhaled. Not long. If you want to handle this quietly, you need to act now. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Send me everything you have. I hung up without another word. Jennifer had spent months perfecting whatever game she was playing. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought she was safe, and that was her second mistake. I didn't make a move right away. That was the mistake Jennifer had made, and when I had enough, I made my first call. Not to Jennifer, not to my lawyer, to someone who would know exactly what I was dealing with. Ashley Miller, Brandon's wife. It had been years since we'd spoken, but we moved in the same circles, attended the same charity events, exchanged polite smiles at galas neither of us wanted to be at. She had always seemed sharp, too sharp for a man like Brandon, which meant if something was off, she already knew. The meeting was set for the next morning. A small cafe downtown, one of those overpriced places Jennifer used to drag me to, where the coffee was poured like art and the customers pretended they had nowhere else to be. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the window where I could see the entrance. Ashley arrived right on time. She was dressed immaculately, as expected. Designer coat, heels that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, dark sunglasses that shielded too much of her expression. She spotted me, hesitated only slightly, then walked over. "Mark," she said smoothly, sliding into the seat across from me. She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes that studied me as though I were a contract she was about to sign or destroy. "I was surprised to get your call." I nodded. "I imagine you already have an idea why I asked to meet." She gave me a slow, knowing smile. "I have a few." I let a beat of silence pass. Then, I leaned forward slightly. "Your husband is having an affair with my wife." Ashley tilted her head, her expression unreadable. And no soak, no gasp of betrayal, just mild amusement. I waited. She sighed, adjusting the sleeve of her coat. "Brandon and I stopped pretending to be married a long time ago. We keep up appearances for business, but I don't ask questions about his extracurricular activities." She tapped a fingernail against her coffee cup. Though I'll admit, I didn't expect Jennifer to be one of them. I studied her reaction, weighing my next words. "You might not care about the affair, but I'm guessing you'd care about fraud." That got her attention. Her fingers stilled against the ceramic. "Go on." I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen twice before sliding it toward her. "Bank statements, transfers, shell company names." Her gaze flicked over the screen, scanning faster than most would. When she reached the last transaction, she exhaled through her nose, a ghost of a laugh escaping her lips. "Well," she murmured, "Brandon's getting reckless." "You knew." It wasn't a question. I knew he was shifting money. She handed my phone back, sitting straighter. "Brandon thinks he's the smartest person in the room. He's been funneling client investments into offshore accounts for years, reallocating, moving numbers, making it all look legitimate. But if he's using your money..." She let out a slow, humorless chuckle. "That's sloppy." I let her process. I already knew the answer to my next question, but I asked it anyway. "Jennifer's involved, isn't she?" Ashley tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the table, her expression thoughtful. "If she is, it's not because she came up with the idea herself. Brandon wouldn't trust her to handle real money. He keeps his partners useful but disposable." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The weight of what Jennifer had done was already settling into place. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just betrayal. It was business. And business, to Brandon Miller, was always a game. Ashley exhaled, picking up her coffee but not drinking it. "I take it you're not planning to sit back and let this play out?" I held her gaze. "Not a chance." Her lips curved slightly. "Good. Then let's ruin them." Neither of us smiled. Ashley was efficient. That was the first thing I noticed. She didn't waste time with emotional reactions or useless anger. The moment we agreed to work together, she moved like someone who had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. We left the cafe separately. She didn't need to say it, but I already knew we couldn't risk being seen together. Brandon was reckless, but he wasn't stupid. If he caught even a hint of what we were planning, he'd bury everything before we had a chance to act. Ashley texted me later that evening. "Ashley, I'll get into his computer tonight. You handle the money trail." That worked for me. I started with the bank accounts. Charles, my financial advisor, was already combing through transactions, flagging anything that didn't belong. The shell company, Garrison Company, was just one of several accounts receiving funds. More names popped up as we dug deeper. Brighton Holdings, Vance International, Oakmont Capital. Brandon had set up a network. Money moved through these accounts in patterns designed to avoid detection. Small transfers from various businesses, including mine, dripped into them before being funneled out, likely into offshore holdings. Jennifer's name didn't appear anywhere, at least not directly. But her involvement was obvious in other ways. Donations meant for the community center had been rerouted. Not all of them, just enough to raise suspicion. A $20,000 contribution from a wealthy donor had been split, half to the charity, half to Brighton Holdings. Smaller donations followed the same pattern. Jennifer wasn't just laundering money. She was covering for Brandon. By morning, Charles had compiled a preliminary report. Charles, we're looking at tax fraud, wire fraud, and possible embezzlement. If this goes public, Brandon and Jennifer won't just lose money. They'll face prison time. Good, but we needed more. That afternoon, I received another text. Ashley got into his email. Call me. I dialed immediately. She answered before the first ring finished. He's worse than I thought, she said. I went through his messages, his financial reports, even his private notes. He's not just stealing. He's blackmailing his own investors. I'll let that sink in. Explain. Some of these investors are laundering their own money, dirty funds from offshore accounts, gambling rings, you name it. Brandon keeps records of every deal. But instead of just running the transactions, he's been using the information to extort them for even bigger payouts. And Jennifer? Ashley hesitated. There are emails between them. Brandon keeps things vague, but there's enough to show she's involved. He tells her when to move money, how to reallocate donations. She asks for confirmation on wire transfers. She knows exactly what's happening. That was all I needed to hear. We need a backup of everything, I said. Screenshots, downloads, copies of the emails. If Brandon realizes you accessed his files, he'll wipe everything. Ashley had already thought of that. I've been compiling it all onto a secure drive. I'll have a full copy ready by tomorrow. They gave me one more night to act like I didn't know. To let Jennifer keep playing her game, thinking she still had control. We were building a case that wouldn't just expose her. It would destroy her. And when it was over, she wouldn't even see it coming. The moment Ashley and I stepped into the lobby of the beachfront resort in Atlantic City, we knew exactly what we were doing. This wasn't a getaway. This was a performance. Everything had to look effortless. Ashley checked in under her name, while I casually lingered nearby, letting the staff assume whatever they wanted. The place was packed. Executives escaping their miserable offices, socialites sipping cocktails with people who weren't their spouses. A perfect breeding ground for whispers. We weren't reckless about it. No forced hand-holding, no over-the-top displays. Just enough proximity, just enough suggestion to let the rumor mill work for us. By the time we reached the rooftop bar that evening, it had already started. Ashley's phone buzzed. Text from Sophia C. You're in AC? And with Mark? Tell me you're not serious. What's going on? Ashley smirked, sipping her drink. That didn't take long. People love a scandal, I said, scanning the room. It had taken careful planning, but the pieces were set. The right people had seen us check in. We had been noticed at the spa earlier, booking side-by-side massages. A strategically placed resort staff member had overheard Ashley laughing over dinner, touching my arm just long enough for it to mean something. No one could prove anything, but that was the point. By morning, the rumors had reached back home. Text from unknown number classy. Mark. Real classy. Enjoy your vacation. You'll regret it. Jennifer. I slid the phone back into my pocket, unfazed. She took the bait. I told Ashley over breakfast. Ashley stirred her coffee, her expression cool. And Brandon? I checked my phone. No direct messages, but I had what I needed. A missed call from a blocked number. A few anonymous social media accounts making vague, passive-aggressive comments under my latest post. He was watching. Good. We'll let the weekend play out. We made sure to be seen. Ashley posted a single picture, just the ocean view, but with 2 wine glasses in the foreground. I posted nothing, but I let myself be tagged in a restaurant check-in. We let people fill in the blanks. The real game wasn't the weekend itself. It was the pressure it created, the unease, the paranoia. Jennifer and Brandon had spent months thinking they were in control, that they were untouchable. Now, they were wondering, What do we know? What were we planning? How much time did they have before everything unraveled? Ashley leaned back in her chair, gazing out over the waves. You think they'll crack? They already have. I glanced down at my phone, where a new notification had just popped up. A message from Jennifer. We need to talk. Now. I let the screen go dark. Let her wait. Let her panic. She had no idea what was coming next. The neighborhood barbecue was a spectacle of wealth and pretension, as always. Carefully manicured lawns, tables draped in white linen, and enough overpriced wine to drown a small country. It wasn't just a party, it was a statement. A reminder that everyone here had made it. Jennifer and Brandon were already there when Ashley and I arrived. Jennifer stood near the grill, locked in conversation with a group of women who live for scandal. She laughed too loudly, gesturing dramatically, her dress a little too perfect, her posture a little too rigid. She was performing, playing the role of the wronged wife, setting the stage for whatever story she planned to spin. Brandon, as expected, was working the crowd, shaking hands, flashing that signature smile that had fooled so many people before. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Ashley and I walked in together, deliberately slow, letting people notice. Conversations stuttered. Eyes flicked toward us, then quickly away. A ripple spread through the gathering. Whispers, nudges, speculative glances. Exactly what we wanted. We made our way toward the main patio, where the host, a painfully enthusiastic real estate developer, was holding court. He spotted us and grinned. Mark, Ashley, glad you could make it. Before I could reply, Jennifer's voice cut through the air. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Silence. People turned as Jennifer stalked toward us, wine glass clutched in a death grip. Her eyes burned with manufactured outrage, her expression sculpted into the perfect blend of wounded and furious. Ashley leaned in slightly. Showtime, she murmured. Jennifer stopped in front of me, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to keep her voice controlled. So this is it, she spat. You're really doing this? Making a spectacle out of our marriage? Out of me? I didn't answer. She wanted a reaction. She wasn't going to get one. Brandon appeared at her side, playing his part. Mark, he said, shaking his head like a disappointed father. I expected better from you. Ashley let out a soft, amused breath. That's funny. I was just thinking the same thing about Jennifer. Jennifer's head snapped toward her. You're pathetic. You think this little stunt is going to actually... I interrupted, my voice calm. This isn't a stunt. It's a reveal. I reached into my blazer and pulled out the folder. The one with the bank statements. The wire transfer logs. The emails. The weight of the moment shifted. The air thickened. I held the folder up, letting the light catch the neatly printed pages. Since you're so eager for an audience, Jennifer, let's give them something worth talking about. A hush fell over the crowd. Jennifer's face paled, her confidence flickering. What is that? Ashley stepped forward, her tone light, but lethal. Oh, just a collection of some very interesting financial documents. Transfers from Mark's business accounts to shell companies. Emails between you and Brandon discussing how to divert donations. Records of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Shall I go on? Someone in the crowd gasped. Brandon's mask cracked for the first time. That's ridiculous, he said, voice sharper than before. You don't have anything. Ashley smiled. Oh, but we do. I flipped open the folder, pulling out a single page. This, for example, a transaction from one of my business accounts to Brighton Holdings. Except Brighton Holdings doesn't actually exist outside of Brandon's network of shell companies. I handed it to the closest person, an attorney who immediately recognized what he was looking at. His expression darkened. And here, Ashley continued, pulling out another sheet. We have an email exchange. Jennifer asking Brandon how to handle a certain transfer without triggering an audit. She turned to Jennifer. So thoughtful of you to document your crimes. Jennifer was frozen, her hands clenched at her sides. Brandon recovered first. This is a bluff, he snapped. You don't have proof. Ashley pulled out a USB drive, twirling it between her fingers. Oh, we have everything. Screenshots, backups, even your personal ledger, Brandon. You really should have used better encryption. Brandon lunged for the drive. Ashley took a step back, laughing. Try that again, and I will press charges for assault. Jennifer turned to me, eyes wild. Mark, please. Please. We can talk about this. I tilted my head. Talk. Like how you talk when you snuck behind my back. When you stole from me. I shook my head. No, Jennifer. We're past that. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Brandon had already started backing away, looking for an escape route. Ashley cut him off. Oh, one more thing, she said cheerfully. We sent everything to the IRS this morning. Brandon's face drained of color. You what? Ashley grinned. They love cases like this. And with all these neatly organized files, well, they won't have to look very hard. Panic flickered across Jennifer's face. Mark, I didn't let her finish. I turned to the crowd, who had been watching in stunned silence. I suggest you all be careful who you do business with, I said casually. Some people aren't as honest as they pretend to be. Then I turned, walking away without looking back. Let them deal with the fallout. Let them watch Jennifer and Brandon crumble. The silence after the confrontation was thick, heavy with disbelief. Jennifer stood frozen, her perfectly curated life unraveling in front of an audience she had spent years trying to impress. Brandon, ever the tactician, looked for an escape, his mind working at full speed to salvage whatever power he thought he had left. But it was already over. The first siren cut through the air like a blade. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then came the flashing blue and red lights, bouncing off the polished exteriors of the luxury cars parked along the street. A police SUV pulled up first, followed by two unmarked black sedans. The doors swung open in perfect synchronization. Four officers stepped out, flanked by two men in suits, federal agents, judging by their demeanor. They moved with precision, eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto their targets. Jennifer's breath hitched. No, she whispered, barely audible. Brandon was already backing away, hands raised slightly in a faux display of innocence. This isn't necessary, he started, his tone carefully controlled. There's been a mistake. The lead officer didn't blink. Brandon Miller? Brandon straightened, trying to summon whatever composure he had left. Yes, but I think you're under arrest for wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement, the officer stated coldly. The words sliced through the stunned silence. Gasps erupted. Someone in the back muttered a curse. The perfect facade that Brandon had built for himself was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Jennifer turned to me, her eyes wide, pleading. Mark, please, tell them this is a mistake. I met her gaze, expression unreadable. I think they have more than enough proof, Jennifer. Two officers moved in, one gripping Brandon's wrist, the other reaching for his shoulder. Brandon snapped. You idiots, he shouted, jerking back. Do you have any idea who I am? I'll have my lawyers on the phone before we even leave this street. The officers weren't fazed. The first set of handcuffs clicked around his wrists with a decisive snap. Go ahead, one of the agents said dryly. You'll need them. Jennifer, shaking now, turned in slow horror as another officer approached her. Jennifer Walker, the officer announced. You're under arrest for financial fraud and conspiracy. Her hands flew to her chest, as if shielding herself from the words. No, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything. The officer wasn't interested in her performance. Ma'am, turn around. Her eyes darted frantically across the crowd, searching for support. But the neighbors who had once envied her, admired her, even resented her success, now only stared in quiet judgment. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. I need to talk to my husband. I didn't move. She swallowed hard. Mark, you can't let them do this to me. I tilted my head slightly. You did this to yourself. The last traces of defiance drained from her face. The cuffs locked around her wrists. She tried one last time, struggling against the officer's grip. This isn't real. This can't be happening. It was, and everyone was watching. The officers led them to separate vehicles. Brandon was the first shoved into the back of a squad car, still muttering threats under his breath. Jennifer hesitated, looking back over her shoulder. For a brief second, She wasn't the manipulative woman who had spent months lying to me. She wasn't the cunning socialite who thought she was untouchable. She was just terrified. But that moment passed. The door shut behind her, sealing her fate. I stood there, watching as the convoy of police and federal agents pulled away, the flashing lights reflecting in the shocked faces of our neighbors. For the first time in months, I breathed. A hand touched my arm. Ashley, standing beside me, watching with the same detached calm. "Well," she murmured, "that was satisfying." I exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Yeah, it was." We turned, leaving behind the stunned whispers and scattered conversations. We had already done what we came to do. The truth was out. The game was over. Jennifer and Brandon had spent years controlling the narrative, manipulating people, bending rules just enough to stay ahead. Now, they were at the mercy of a system that didn't care how charming they were. And I had no plans to look back. Over the next few days, the fallout spread like wildfire. News of the arrests rippled through the city, making headlines in business circles. Clients backed out of deals with Brandon's firm. The IRS and federal agencies moved in swiftly, freezing accounts and seizing assets. Neighbors, once hesitant to choose sides, suddenly found their opinions. Apologies rolled in, thinly veiled attempts to align themselves with the winning side now that Jennifer and Brandon were finished. The stolen donations? Being returned to the rightful organizations. Quietly but efficiently. Jennifer's legacy of charity had been nothing more than a front, and now it was unraveling thread by thread. As for me, I wasn't interested in the pity, the gossip, or the "I always knew she was trouble" comments. I was already moving forward. Divorce papers were filed within the week. My accounts were secured. My business was intact. Jennifer and Brandon had spent so long playing the game, convinced they were untouchable. They had forgotten one thing. Even the best players can lose. And when they do, the fall is spectacular. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.